What's up everybody, it's George Gabriel and I'm going to show you how to use bussing for a killer mix. If you've watched my series on the ultimate mixing workflow, which is the tabs workflow, you'll know that I use buses to collect like-kind things together to make a better sounding mix. I often harp on the fact that a lot of people go straight from tracks to stereo out, which I think is a huge mistake. In this video, I'm going to pull up a mix that goes from tracks to stereo out and then apply all those tracks to buses and apply effects to those buses to get that truly professional sound. Check it out. I'm in a Logic session here where I have a mix that I've already done, but I took all the plugins off and I took all the bussing out and I actually just made every track go to stereo out. And I want to show you what that looks like. If I just hit play, now the first thing you'll notice is if I look at my stereo out, I am at plus 3.5 dB over 0. And if you know anything about digital recording, once you go over 0, it just cuts off the audio file. That's not good. It can have aliasing, it can have glitching. We don't want this kind of sound. Now a simple mastering chain with a limiter can fix that. However, what I'm really trying to do is take all the instruments that are like kind and group them together on buses and then apply certain effects to each one of those buses to kind of gel that sound together. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that all my tracks and my regions are named so I can just know by the region what it is that I'm looking at. And then I'm going to mute everything and just start with the drums. Why? Because that's the meat and potatoes of my mix. So I'm going to start and see what I have here. So I'm going to look and say I have hip kicks. Now for me, I like to put the kick unaffected on what I call a sidechain, which is really not a sidechain. It's just another audio path. It's not a bus, but I like to have that ultimate control and I put that up top. So I'm going to take it from stereo out and I'm going to go to my bus sidechain and now it's going to show up here. That's what I want. So if I hit play, I should just hear that raw kick sound. Okay, it's kind of a hip kick. It's kind of soft, but that's going to be my basis for moving forward on. Now, the next thing I like to do is I like to add whatever percussion I'm going to be using. Now I'm going to look and see I've got trippy percussion here. So let's go ahead and see what that is. Let's see what the other one is. So it's basically the hi-hats and the snare, if you will, because there's no real snare in this piece. So I'm going to take both of these trippy percussions and instead of going to stereo out, I'm going to take them to the bus of drums. And I'm going to get a balance between the two of them. Pretty good balance. The next thing I'm going to do is look at my loops here. I have some loops going. Let's hear what that sounds like when I add those in. Now, I don't want those loops to take away from the hi-hat and the snare, which is really claps. So I'm going to move them to my loops bus. Let's go ahead and do that by selecting these tracks. And instead of going to stereo out, I'm going to move them to my loops bus. Now you'll see the audio show up here now. Because the loops are really doing this. And my hi-hats and perceived snare are really something I want to stand out, and they're very percussive, where the other ones are a little bit more washy. So I want to separate those two and then later apply compression and some EQs to get them really to stand out. Since the kick and the hi-hat and snare and the loops really encompass all the drums of this, I'm going to go to the next thing because really I want to address my rhythm section first. And the next thing in the line for that is the bass. So I can see I have a synth bass here. Let's see what that sounds like. Okay, so what I'm going to do is instead of having that go to stereo, I'm going to put that on my bass bus. And now you can see it's down here on its own little bass bus. Okay, so I've separated the bass, I've separated the loops, I've separated the drums, and now I'm going to see what else I have. Looks like I have some real bass here. Let's solo that. Okay, so I have some real bass, and what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to make a little change up here. I'm going to put the real bass on the bass bus, and I'm going to take this synth bass, and actually I'm going to put it on synth 2 bus. And that way I can distinctly separate the two basses. I don't want them to fight each other. So let's see what that sounds like. So I have the synth bass on a synth 2 bus. I've got the bass on the bass bus. I got my hi-hats and snare on a drum bus. I got my loops on a loop bus. And I got that kick going on a sidechain where I can have a little bit more control over it. Now, this is a personal preference, putting the kick on that sidechain. I like to just have it separated so I can just push the kick. Could I put it on a bus? Sure, I could. But for whatever reason, it's a habit I've gotten into, and that's what I'm doing. And it looks like I forgot that there's another drum track down below. So let's see what that is. Let me solo that and see what this is. Okay, essentially it's toms and hi-hats. I don't have a snare, I don't have a kick on that drum set. And since that kind of falls into the drum category, I'm going to actually put these with the other hi-hats on the drums bus. So now let's see what we got here. Okay, nice. Now, if I look at what I have left, I have a synth pluck, I have another pluck, I have a pulse, and then I also have some pads, I have a piano. So I'm going to kind of put them in different categories. Let's listen to the plucks. So if I take that particular pluck and solo it, and then listen to the other pluck, okay, they all have that same percussive kind of synth sound. So I'm going to throw those all on the synth bus. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to select the 3 and go from stereo out to the synth 1 bus. Again, this percussive sound, that's the way I want to do it. Now let's take a look at the piano. I'm going to solo that and just see what kind of piano sound this is. Okay. Simply, I'm going to go ahead and take that from stereo out and put it on my piano bus. Now you'll notice the level dropped a little bit. That is because all my buses are at a lower level. They're either at -12 or I may have adjusted them when I mixed this prior. And so you'll notice that you don't want to have your buses at 0 because they're going to blow up your stereo out, which you don't want. But now if I were to play the track, I've got all of these things bussed out. Let's take a look at the buses and see what that looks like. Okay, now I can have control over these little areas without having to mix it on the track level. I can mix it on the bus level. And because I'm putting like kind things together, things that are percussive together, things that have the same types of timbre, I can apply effects later, which you'll see, which are going to accentuate those areas with a proper kind of compression and EQ to make them stand out a little bit more and make them glue together a little bit more. Now I notice I've got 2 sets of pads here, so I'm going to go ahead and see what they sound like. First I'm going to solo this pad. Okay, nice washy pad. Now let's see what this pad sounds like. That's a sidechain pad. But again, these are the long washy sounds, so I'm going to couple them together. And because I'm out of my synth buses, I'm going to put them on a string bus because effectively they're kind of like strings. So I'm going to take the sidechain pad and the regular pad, and instead of going from stereo out, I'm going to put them on my strings bus. You can blend them together exactly how you want them on the bus so they speak the way that you want, but you can always go back and adjust your track levels so you get the proper balance on that bus of those instruments that are on that bus. Now there is something called sig here, and I'm guessing that is the signature, the bum 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 bum, so let's listen to that. Now that is a piano, but since that's a signature, it needs to stand out more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that on its own bus. Now I've got no guitars in this, so I'm going to go ahead and put this on the acoustic guitar bus. And you might be confused, like, why are you putting it on acoustic guitar bus? I can rename any one of these buses just by clicking on it and say, this is the SIG bus. And I could say strings 1, this is my pads bus. But what I'm using in this, which is kind of a bad feature in Logic, is I'm using, if you go to your I/O labels, I had to determine exactly the names of the buses that I wanted if I wanted them to show up when I'm on the track level and I want to see what it says. So I decided to call these things that, but I can always rename them on the surface. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen globally. You can't just change your bus name and it changes here. This is something I hope that Apple fixes, because this is one of the biggest glaring problems of using your I/O labels, is that when you change your bus name down here, it doesn't change it in the I/O area. But that's something I just have to deal with. So now the SIG is going to the acoustic by busing it there. And I've already renamed acoustic to SIG. So it should show up there if I solo this. And it does. Now it looks like the only thing I have left in these are effects. So let's take a listen. I got Wooshes. And I've got my effects that I grabbed off a splice. More Wooshes. So I'm going to take both of these and I'm going to throw them on my effects bus. So when all is said and done, I've got everything now properly bussed. Okay, it's a nice mix. Now I want to go and really go to each bus and apply compression and EQ to get the best out of each one of those buses. Now I'm using Universal Audio UAD plugins for a lot of things, but you can do this with Logic plugins, or if you have Waves or whatever it is that you have, you can use whatever it is that you use and that you're used to get the best sound. So in that, I can solo my drum bus and start applying the compression and the EQ. I'm going to say this: you do not want to use effects like reverb or delay on a bus. That's not what it's for. Really, the area that you want to use effects are up here where you've designated these auxiliary effects. And the only effect I really have going on is an Altiverb reverb, and it looks like that's only on the Wooshes and the SIG. And really how you apply those effects is by using your sends, finding your effects bus, and then dialing in the amount of that sound that you want to go to that effect. These effects buses actually return to the effects return, so I can have more control over the overall effects. Not a lot of effects on this, but reverbs and delays should happen up here, and compression and EQ is really what happens on the bus. You can check out part 2 of my tabs mixing workflow, and it really explains what effects you use where and kind of the rules of that. Now you'll notice when I solo the drums, anything I have bussed to the drums are going to be what shows up in my timeline here. And now I'm going to apply compression and EQ to this. So in my audio effects, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to probably use the UAD Imperial Labs Distressor. And I'm going to go to their drum options here. And I'm just going to kind of audition some of these and see which one works best. Now, since there's not a lot of real sounds, I want to hear how the toms work with this. It's fairly compressed, but it's also really making it stand out. If I turn the effect off, you can see the claps are a little bit louder. If I turn it on, it kind of evens everything out and kind of makes it very tick-it. Now, this is fairly aggressive, but really not a lot happening here, so I'm not going to get things too squashed here. Maybe the toms a little bit. Let's hear it again. No, they're working for me. So I'm going to keep this, and I might apply some EQ to this, but I want to kind of wait until I get some more things in the mix here before I decide I want to throw a lot of EQ on it, which is going to bring me next to my loops. I want to see how they gel together, so I'm going to keep the drums soloed and go ahead and listen to my loops now with this and apply a distressor compressor on that. Let's go ahead and solo the loops first, because I want to make sure that the loops can speak really well. And again, I'll do the same thing and audition some options on this distressor on these loops. So I'll hit play. Again, I'm going to go to my drums. In fact, I'm going to unsolo the drums. I just want to hear how it works on these loops. Okay, country rock snare is actually working for me here. It's a nice percussive vibe. The compression is really accentuating each little detail of that. So one thing I haven't really brought in was the kick. So I'm going to bring this kick in and get a blend over here of my kick. Now I could apply, since this is a soft kick, I could apply again my distressor. Geez, I like the distressor. Actually, I use other plugins too, but right now I seem to be hot on the distressor. And just see what makes this kick speak. So let's go ahead and play and audition some settings here. Ooh, kick blender. Heavily compressed, but it's really getting the kick to speak. I'm going to take my output down so it's not red lighting so hot, but I really like this blend. At this point, I feel like I got a really good drum mix, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the live bass. And just as a general rule, always play live bass. You notice this is mostly a synth track, but there's just this nuance in on a live bass that just brings a whole nother level of sonic clarity, even when you couple it with a synth bass. And I can't stress that enough. Live bass is really one of the things you should always do. So I'm going to unmute my live bass. I'm going to check my bass bus here. So if I pull up this Logic compressor on it and I go to guitars and I go to bass heavy, I make a couple modifications. I take my attack all the way up, I take my release all the way down, and it really gets the bass to speak. See, without it, it's kind of flat, but with it, you really start to hear all the nuances. Now, could you do this on the track level? Sure, especially since it's just the bass. But I like to kind of do this on the outside so I can see them on my bus level. Really, I don't generally compress too much on the track level. Sometimes I do. Usually what I'm doing is compressing on the bus level. Okay, I'm digging this. Now, the next instrument I'm going to choose in this is the piano. Why the piano? Because pianos have a distinct hit to them, and they also have a distinct sustain. So I'm going to focus on the piano. Now, this is an Omnisphere piano, so it's already kind of washy, but let's just put that into the mix here. Okay, I'm going to go back and choose my favorite Empirical Labs distressor, and they do have a keys option. So I'm going to just audition some of these. And in the case of this, I'm just going to, since this has got the most movement in the beginning, I'm just going to loop this so I can audition it properly. You hear how this compression that I put on really got that, it nicely brought that up in the mix. That's kind of what the compression does, is it takes the peaks and squashes them, and it takes the valleys and brings them up to give a more even sound. Okay, cool. I'm happy with that setting. Now I'm going to go to the Plucks, also a percussive synth sound, but also kind of washy. And I'm going to go ahead and take all my Plucks that I've put on the Synth 1 bus. Now this is where I start to begin to mix the buses a little bit. The piano's a little bit too loud, so I'm going to take this bus down a hair, and I'm going to go ahead, let's use something different, just for the sake of argument here. I'm going to go to the Fairchild, great compressor. And again, I'm going to audition these, and what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and just get all my Plucks soloed, so I can just hear how the compression is working with that. And let's see what our options are. Keys. Ooh. Kind of digging this grand piano setting. really kind of brings everything out. So let's hear that in the mix here. Again, I'm mixing my bus a little bit. You know what I'm gonna do is the toms are getting a little lost for me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to my drum track and I'm gonna duplicate it by doing Command D. And that really brings the same plugins. And what I'm gonna do is just take those toms and bring them down. I'm assuming these are the toms. Let's just make sure. Oh, there's a cymbal there. I don't want the cymbal. Now I'm going to take these to another bus. I have available next to my drums is my orchestral bus. And so I want to just go ahead. I'm going to bring back my little friend, the Empirical Labs Distressor. I'm going to see what tom options they have. So I'll go to do drums. And do they have tom options? Let's see. Toms? Anybody toms? Again, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pick one little area where I know the toms are active. I'm just going to cycle listen to it and listen to some of my options for this distressor. Okay, there's a cymbal in there I need to get rid of. So let's go ahead and where's that cymbal? Okay, what I'll do is I'm going to copy this back up here, go and delete all these toms, and then go to the region below and delete the cymbal. I just want toms on this. All right, so let's just listen to this. You're saying, why are you taking so long to do this? Well, I just want to make sure I got the right thing. And actually, the thing I like the best so far, I think is I like the country rock snare on this. That's the setting I'm going to choose. Let's get out of this. Okay, now they're separated from the cymbals, and I got this thing going on now, and I have a little bit more control over the toms on the bus level. All right, I'm feeling pretty good right now about this mix. I probably should have added the synth bass earlier, but I'm gonna go ahead and see what that synth bass sounds like and see what kind of compression I'm gonna put on that. Okay, surprise, surprise, I'm gonna go to my little friend, the Distressor, and just see what kind of key options they have there, or maybe bass options even. Let's go ahead and play. This focus point really makes it stand out. Now, I will say, just because it's louder doesn't mean it's better. So really what I want to do is I want to make sure the two basses are not fighting each other. So I'm going to solo the other bass and see what's the blend on the bus level I'm going to have between these two basses. That sounds pretty good to me, so I'll unsolo this and see how these all work together now. Nice. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the pads in. This is going to give this top line washy thing in. And one of my pads has got a side chain on it. So it's going to have that meep, meep, meep. So I just want to make sure that that speaks. I'm going to go ahead and dial up that Fairchild again and just listen to those and see what that sounds like. I'm going to solo these two pads and make sure that they work together well, that they're blended on the track level well, and that the compressor is doing its job in bringing the nuances of that out. And let's see what happens. I think I like the sustain piano because pads are inherently sustained, so I'm going to use the sustain piano and see how that feels. Let's listen to it in the mix. Nice. Now I'm going to focus on the signature here, which is just a bum, 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 bum. And I want to make sure that that stands out nicely. So let's just go ahead and probably apply another Fairchild to that. And again, I'm going to just cycle record so I just hear that over and over again. So let's go ahead and let's see what kind of key options I have. I kind of like pretty piano, so I'm going to stick with that. If I want more level on it, I'll just bring it up on the bus level. So let's hear what that sounds like. Nice. It's nice. The last thing I have is the Wooshes, which is just really the effect sound. Wooshes in general are effecty, so I'm going to probably compress those a little bit more. I'll use my friend the Distressor on that. So let's go ahead and just listen to those, dialing up my little friend the Distressor. And again, I'm going to cycle this little area so I can just hear the Wooshes. And let's see what options I have. So let's go ahead. Let's try aggressive and see what happens. I'm going to use the opto vocal setting here and just see how that gels in the mix. Let's see what this does. Nice. So now I've got everything bust, I've got everything compressed. Now what I really want to pay attention to is everything speaking clearly. I don't want to get into the habit of putting EQ on everything because then I can create an ugly EQ curve. But usually this is where I bring my mastering chain in because it might do a lot of the fixing of the high end that I might not be getting of certain things. So I'm going to go to my mastering chain here. I'm going to pull up my shadow mastering setting. And the components of this are really a Shadow Hills mastering compressor, some EQ, and on the very last part of it is a limiter. Even though I have these settings kind of set, I'm going to modify them. So I'm going to go ahead and move this around a little bit. Since this is an electronic piece, I'm going to kind of do some different settings here. And let's just see what this sounds like. It's going to be significantly louder. And at this point, I can actually take my EQ, and you can see I kind of have a little bit of a smile here. I got a goose at the low end, and I got a shelf on the high end, and this kind of brings out the low, it gives it a smile, takes out some of the harsh mids. Again, you really need to have your settings, but you need to kind of mess with them too to make sure that they really work for exactly what you're trying to achieve here. So I'm just using this auto listen to hear the areas. I want to get that warmth in there. All right, I feel like that's pretty good. This is a crucial part of the mastering chain, which is making sure that you are not going over 0. So I have my output set at -0.1, so it'll never go above that. It'll squash it down. And I just also want to make sure that my input level is not too loud and my output level is not slammed. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. It's actually really good, and really the best test is to bypass all this and see where you're peaking on your output of your entire mix with all the buses. Now -6 is on the low end. I would try to peak everything about -3, but in order to do that, you've got all these buses now. So how do we do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select all my buses that are being used and my sidechain and my effects return. And now that I know that I'm peaking at -6, I'm going to bring these up probably 2 dB and see what that feels like. It's going to bring them all collectively up together. So now let's just test that out and see how that reads. It's nice. Nothing is hitting 0. It's got plenty of headroom. And now when you add that mastering chain, which is going to be your compression and some EQ, which is going to inherently add some dBs to the mix, then it won't hit the limiter so hard and really make it squashy. We don't want it to make it squashy. We want it to make it sound nice. You can compress it and you can limit it, but if you start to hear the compression and the limiting, you've gone too far. So let's go ahead and add that mastering chain back in. See, what you're seeing here is some movement. If it's just red, you've gone too far. But here there's movement. It's not going too far. It's a nice tight mix. Now at this point in my mix, what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen. Am I hearing that side chain pad? Are the whooshes too loud? Do I really hear the hi-hats and the snare? And now I'm going to decide to apply some additional EQ, maybe do some little mixing on the bus and really hone in that. And really, at this point, you can actually listen to it 10, 20, 30 times and just get all the nuances to dial in that mix. So let's go ahead and listen. So I might want to go a little bit more aggressive on this. And I know, I'm not getting paid by these guys, I promise. I just like this. So I'm going to go a little bit more aggressive. Let's just go aggressive on these side chains because I don't feel like I'm getting enough of them. Ooh, I like room boom. Let's use that. And let's see now when I bring this back in, can I hear that sidechain pad happening? Taking it down a little bit because it's brought up the level. So I'm taking it down on the bus level. And I might want to add just a little high end. So I'm going to go ahead and, you know what? This cool little plugin, the Hitsville EQ mastering. I'm just going to mess with some of these settings and see if I really can hear it come out some. So let's go ahead and hit the bright setting. Yes, but I'm going to turn it down. It's too loud now. And this is where I want to bring my kick up because I really want it to be like poof, poof, poof. And I'm missing that a little bit. So I'm going to bring the kick up a little bit here. EQ-wise, I'm going to bring in on the kick just to find out where that real sub thing has happened. I'm going to bring in this little plug-in here by Brainworks and just kind of listen just to the kick here. Now, I just want to hit this area here. So I'm actually taking the frequency of the key of the song and accentuating that. So it actually gives it a tone of the actual key of the song, which is nice. And then I'll back it back down a little bit. Maybe widen it a hair. So those moves I've made haven't really affected the overall mix of being too slammed. But now I'm going to go back and just listen to a few more things and call it good. A good practice is actually to go down to each instrument, like, do I hear that? Is it speaking? Do I hear that? Is it speaking? Do I hear that? And if it's not, then you might want to apply a little EQ in the area that it needs. Be careful not to add too much bass though, because bass is where a mix can break down. If it's like, I don't hear the low end, make sure the low end is only for the instruments that have low end. Sometimes you apply too much low end to synths and stuff like that, and it really just fights the mix. I'm going to go ahead. Do I hear the bass guitar? Do I hear this? Do I hear that? And go through this a few more times. I'm going to add a little of that clickiness to the bass in. One last thing before you finish your mix is really to make sure that you lower your mix really, really low. And because what we tend to do is when we're mixing too loud, the high end kind of gets squashed by the low end. But when you take it down to almost nothing, if you just hear hi-hats, you got too much hi-hat. So I'm going to do this since I'm in ears here, which is also not the proper way to mix, but it's the best I can do while we're doing a video here. I'm going to bring my master level down just to hear how my hi-hats are sitting in the mix. Good. It's good. I don't hear like because sometimes people are just mixing so loud that the hi-hats are so present, and then if you're listening to it on a phone or anything like that, or lesser speaker system, you're like, man, this is all hi-hats. You want to make sure you've got a nice blend, a lot of low end, a nice happy mid where it's not too abrasive, and that high end. You really want to cover the whole spectrum of your mix. You can see how the bussing actually takes like-kind things together and brings them together nicely, where you can really glue those parts together individually to make them work together as like-kind instruments. And then when you bring them all together, it really solidifies the mix and glues the mix together. Nice. I really dig this mix, and even though I'm using headphones, which I never ever do, which you shouldn't either, I feel like I got a good basis. So if I wanted to, after I'm not having a microphone in the room, go back and listen to it on my proper monitors, then I can really just do the final tweaks, and I've got it really settled in. See, bussing is really the key to getting a clarified, clear mix where you're putting things like-kind together. If you haven't checked out my tabs on how to set up a bussing system, and you haven't checked out my auto load video on how to actually create an auto load that include buses and auxes for effects, I suggest you check those out. Make your setup like that, and then you can have your same kind of mix happening on your end. Using buses for your mix really elevates your mix to the next level. So what do you think? Do you like this approach? If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button, click the bell icon to be notified of future videos. Also follow me on Instagram at GGabrielMusic, and please add your comments. Is this helpful? Is this something you'd like to pursue? You just want to keep on the tracks to stereo out, and that's good. I want to know your feedback on this. It's important for me. I'd like to dialogue with you, so make sure you leave your comments. Until next time, this is George Gabriel Music.